Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. May peace be upon you. This is Edward Ahmed Mitchell, the Deputy Director of CARE National, welcoming you to the Daily Dose COVID Conversations with CARE. Thank you so much for joining us. And again, Eid Mubarak to all of you. I'm very happy to be here today with my co-host, Communications Director of CARE Georgia, Sausan Salim. Assalamu alaikum, Sausan. How are you?
Alaikum salam, Edward. I've been better. Today has been a really emotional and distressing time for our community today and the last few days, last few months actually. And I think the thing that's really I've been holding on to is my ability to act and to speak, and that is why I'm here today. So I really do appreciate CARE inviting me to co-host today's program.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, it's even though we are just a few days after Eid, we may not look very happy, in part because of the news that, we are all aware of, that news that is the topic of our program today, not to mention the ongoing pandemic, COVID-19, and so many other crises happening around the world. But today on our program, inshallah, we have a very specific focus, an issue that we've talked about far too often on this program over the past few months, and that is the issue of police brutality. Salson, can you share with our viewers a little more detail about the topic of today's show and why it's so important today?
So today we are talking about the issue that happened, the incident of police brutality that occurred in Minneapolis. There was a brother, George Floyd. He did not resist arrest. He was he was arrested, and police officers were sitting with their knees. They were kneeling on his neck and body until he basically went unconscious. And during that time that he was being arrested, he kept saying over and over again, "I can't breathe, I can't breathe," to which the police officers did not respond or react in a feasible manner. And unfortunately, he did pass away. And since that point, there have been riots regarding this issue. And today we're discussing why this occurred, why certain cases receive different kinds of media coverage, and how to further the conversation of police brutality against our African American brothers and sisters in this country.
Yeah. And again, the sad thing is the topic here that we're discussing is not unique. I mean, and people who are born well before you and I were discussing this issue. I mean, you go back as much further than Rodney King. That's just probably the first time you had a clear video, widespread video footage of an incident of brutal police brutality. But this is not new. It's been going on for decades and decades and decades. But thanks to the advent of cell phone cameras, we now see so many of these incidents when they occur, and being able to see the horrific nature of what is done, can inspire change. In this case, it has inspired protests, the firing of the police officers involved, and now, of course, CARE, Minnesota, and others are demanding that the officers involved in this murder be charged with murder. That is yet to happen, but we hope that will happen soon. And on that note, I want to bring in our guests for today's program. This incident in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Minnesota is a very large African American, and yes, and a large Muslim community, all of whom have been aware of, impacted, and tracking this story, this issue. And so I want to thank our guests from CARE Minnesota for joining us today. We are going to have the Deputy Director of CARE Minnesota, Mohammed Ibrahim, with us. Brother Mohammed can come on in. And we're also going to have Brother Jaylan Hussein, who is the executive director of CARE Minnesota. He'll be joining us soon, inshallah. He's actually going to visit the site of the murder and the site of the protests from last night. He'll be joining us soon, inshallah. We'll pipe him in when he is ready to go. But let's start with Brother Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Muhammad. How are you?
Wa alaikum assalam. Eid Mubarak to both of you.
Eid Mubarak, Eid Mubarak, alhamdulillah, Eid Mubarak. So, Brother Muhammad, I'm going to let Salson start us off with the first question to you, so you can share with us, what's going on in Minnesota from your perspective, inshallah. Salson, please take it away.
Brother Muhammad, can you please just give us a little bit of a rundown as to what is going on? What's the state of Minneapolis at this time?
Yeah, and first of all, I want to say thank you so much to both of you for inviting me on to come onto the show, and barakallahu fikum. everybody's heartbroken in Minnesota right now. It's a lot of questions are being asked, and I think the biggest thing that the reality that's hitting us all that it could have been is kind of the statement that I'm hearing from a lot of friends and families and locals that live in Minneapolis, that it could have been me, it could have been my sibling, it could have been my father, it could have been my sister, it could have been my neighbor, it could have been my friend, or it could have been my classmate. So that's the biggest thing that's kind of like, and things kind of situations like this are always tragic, but when it hits close to home, not only once, but now the second time in, you know, in a span of 5 years, it could be, I don't know if the word numbing does it justice, but you feel like, you know, there isn't enough being done and enough hasn't been done. And that's what you know, the response that you're seeing in a lot of the unrest and the protesting and stuff like that that's happening in the community right now.
And thank you, Mohammed, for sharing that. And Ayan, our producer, I'd like to at this point show some video showing what is going on, the protests that happened last night, a bit of the incident involving George Floyd. I mean, I think many people are aware of this, but for those who are not aware of what's happened in the last 24 hours, we're going to let you look at this news report showing that. And I want to warn you in advance, it does have a few seconds of the attack on George Floyd. So, you know, if you don't want to watch that, if you feel like it'll be too traumatic for you to see, obviously, you know, just turn away for about 2 minutes and then come back to us. But I would argue, as many activists do, that being able to see these images inspires public outrage, and that public outrage leads to public pressure, and that public pressure is what gets change. I suspect that if we had never seen video footage of Rodney King being beaten, or what happened to Ahmaud Arbery, or what happened to George Floyd, I suspect we would not even know their names. So we have to balance, you know, showing these images in order to expose the truth, to expose injustice and force change, but also making sure that we are not traumatizing people all over again by showing this. So again, to anyone who does not want to watch this, you feel uncomfortable, please just turn away from it 2 minutes and then come back, inshallah, for the conversation. But we're going to go ahead and play the video now. This is a news report documenting the protests last night, a bit of what happened to George Floyd, and where we are now. Ayan, go ahead and play.
Shut up. They will kill me. They will kill me, man.
Murder charges are not gonna stick. They pulled that trick on us too many times. We want these people to be prosecuted for manslaughter, because them charges gonna stick, and that sentence gonna be long still. And that's what we want. Because guess what? George has never have his life back again. There's no. This man can serve 15 years in prison and still get out and still be able to continue life. It's gonna be hard, but he still can breathe. He can still talk to his family. George can't. So some change needs to happen.
Thank you, Ion. So, there are a few things to break down from that video. I think, the last observation comparing the police, the militarized police crackdown on protesters last night in Minneapolis to the almost indifferent police response to rowdy armed protesters, white protesters in Michigan, is remarkable but not surprising. Mohammed, did you notice that difference? What happened with the protests last night? Did the police overreact? What's the community's feeling about what happened last night? Did that just make this whole thing much worse?
Yeah, I mean, the tensions are a little, higher today and throughout, the night, last night as things kind of progressed. And I mean, protesters being tear gassed, rubber bullets being shot. There was a Muslim girl that got hit in the face yesterday with a rubber bullet. And then, them shooting off warning shots and things of that nature definitely, makes individuals that are protesting, that are peacefully protesting, tend to lean the other way a little bit, you know what I mean? And
yeah.
And especially when you were seeing, other protesters with them carrying guns and carrying weapons and yelling in the faces of the police and stuff like that because they want to go get a haircut or they want to, go to the nail salon, definitely strikes a different chord within the community.
Right.
But even if you look at like the handling of the case of the previous incidents that happened in Minneapolis, whether it's the police union, backing, the white police officer that killed Ahmaud Arbery, Philando Castile, versus the black officer that killed, the white woman, and
Yes,
how they decided to back over, and how they backed, the white police officer, but they did not back, the black police officer. Kind of tells a different story when it comes to contrasting communities within Minneapolis. So this is something that is being seen, across nationwide, but we're seeing it firsthand here in Minneapolis.
Yeah. Salsan, please.
Brother Muhammad, if we can, we have seen a variance in how the public responds to different police shootings. And we've seen with the Ahmaud Arbery case, it took 2 months for the public to really begin discussing the incident. Whereas with this incident, it was within a few days that people took to social media and took to the streets. So can you talk about a little bit why there is such a variance in the way people react to certain cases and not with others?
I think it just depends on the community and the way that the facts play out within the community. For ourselves, being from Minnesota and being right there, this happened in the community where there was, the videotapes, I think makes a huge difference. There's multiple people videotaping the way that, Ahmaud Arbery was gunned down was completely different than the way that, George Floyd was, murdered. So those things can play a factor, but of course you have individuals that were there advocating on behalf of, George. They're telling him, hey, he cannot breathe. They're asking them, why is he being arrested? He's not, fighting the arrest. He's not obstructing them in any way, shape or form. And also, reminding the police officers that the use of excessive force is unnecessary. And, having, the white police officer hear all of these things and then almost these words are falling on deaf ears, definitely changes the circumstance. And, you can't compare, they both are extremely tragic in their own rights, you know what I mean? And, we are, feel, heartfelt sorrow for both of them, but at the same time, we're going to continue to fight for both, even though they both are, unique situations. But when it comes to Minneapolis, seeing all of those things, having, a police officer who's supposed to be a public servant, do these things right in front of you as you're correcting him and telling him, hey, you're not supposed to do this. You're seeing them breaking all these codes where, they're doing, they're choking, George, they're, refusing to, kind of like answer the public in general, changes the circumstances, and it causes outrage, especially when you have different angles of the camera. You see, a video of George not, he's not fighting the arrest whatsoever. He's being taken down. He's not fighting back whatsoever. And then how does it escalate from that point to having 3 police officers kneeling on him, with 1 police officer having his knee pressing down on George's neck while individuals are talking to him and asking him like, hey, you need to relax or whatever the case is, you see him kind of give off this little smirk. And I think that might have been, another trigger to, the community and to the individuals that saw the video in Minneapolis.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's so horrific about this incident is that even though there was no, blood involved, there was no gunshots involved. It's not the most graphic image you've seen, but to me, it was almost worse than most of the other videos I've seen because of how long it lasted, how deliberate it was, how callous it was, and how unnecessary it was. And oftentimes officers will open fire in a split second. Something happens. It's still wrong then, but it's like a split second evil decision, right? This was an 8-10 minute evil decision that was so unnecessary. This officer was not in danger. He was not afraid. There were 3 other people on this guy, on Mr. Floyd. This was just a deliberate, callous act of murder. And what's truly disturbing, if you watch the whole video, is in addition to the fact that Mr. Floyd was begging for his life, saying, "I can't breathe," in addition to the fact that the people there would tell the officer, "He can't breathe, you're killing him," the officer kept his knee on his neck after George Floyd became non-responsive. After he stopped talking, after blood was coming out of his nose, the officer kept his knee on him, just utterly indifferent, utterly deliberate. And that brings me to an interesting question, Mohammed, which is one of the protesters in the video we showed said, "We don't want murder charges filed." And he said the reason is that murder, first-degree murder, second-degree murder, is such a high legal bar that he thinks that a prosecution for manslaughter is much more likely to succeed. Do you know what the family's position on that is? Has the community kind of reached a point of what they're asking for? Because my initial reaction is this is murder, at least for that officer who kept his knee there. This is murder. But there is an argument to be made that, we want to win. We want justice at the end of this case. So maybe we should go for something that is more likely to succeed. Have you heard any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So not yet. I think it's still premature, but I think at the current stance right now, murder is the only verdict in my personal mind, just because of the nature of the situation. And at the same time, George was not armed. He was not armed, and then so an individual that was going in, that was being arrested for something that did not have to do with a weapon whatsoever, and then resulting in that individual dying, changes the circumstance completely for me. So the only charge is murder in my mind. But at the same time, if you look at the convictions in the past history, murder convictions don't stick. So I completely understand the position of the protester, but that also kind of echoes to the broken system that we have. Minneapolis is one of those, or Minnesota is one of the states where if a police officer gets fired, they could go through a process where they can get their job back and get back pay for the time that they weren't working. So there's certain things like that exist within the city that we not only need to hold these police officers accountable, but for the individuals that allow these systems to exist, so that we have to settle for a manslaughter charge in order for something to stick instead of going for a first degree or second degree murder. And at the same time, these police officers are trained, right? So they are trained in defending themselves. Their body is a weapon. So even though, George was not armed, the police officer was armed with techniques and the training that he had throughout the process when they're going through the police academy. So they know exactly what they're doing. They understand how their body works. They understand the amount of pressure that they're applying, and they understand, everybody's pressure points and weak points and so on and so forth. So, so it's careless in the behavior that in the way that they conducted the arrest. They're careless in the way that they were not listening to the public. And ultimately, George Floyd was right. He couldn't breathe. And he said, "You're going to kill me." And that's exactly what they did.
He said he told the people watching, "They're going to kill me, man." He said it, and he was right. Sal, something, go ahead.
I can't help but really feel for the people who were actually there witnessing the situation and not being able to act, particularly because they see that these police officers are kneeling on a man who is not resisting arrest, and for them to act in an aggressive way, quote unquote, or a way to try to stop the police officers from doing this to Brother George. What can they do? What can they do to be productive bystanders that could help the situation, if that's even a possibility?
There's a lot that you could do. Protesting is one thing that you could definitely do. Another thing that you could do is you can pick up the phone, You can call the Hennepin County Attorney's Office and ask for a charge to be filed, ask for these individuals to be arrested. You can ask for these individuals, everybody, all the officers that were involved, whether they were at the scene, the individual that gave the order, what have you, everybody that was involved with the death of George Floyd to be arrested and to be held until charges are filed. That's what you can ask. And you could also ask for them not to issue bail as well for the duration of the time until a verdict is reached within the case. Oftentimes we see police, get arrested, and then there's a certain time period that they have to file a charge, and if not, then they are free to go. We can't allow that to happen during this time. And then also we can hold accountable every single individual that is in office, whether elected or appointed, to look at these policies and figure out how come police officers who are fired for doing negligent things can, get their job back. And I saw a stat earlier today that 50% of those officers get their job back and they get back pay. That is ridiculous. We need to look at ways to figuring out, can we get police officers that are actually from the community, police officers that are from Minneapolis to police and to be public servants of Minneapolis because they know how to interact with the community, so on and so forth. And, there's all these stats that you see that, individuals of color are killed 13 times more in the state of Minnesota than white individuals, and that is alarming because, it's 2020 and, we're still dealing with the same issues.
And it's not unique to Minnesota. That's the sad thing. We've seen this all over the country, even in places that are considered very politically liberal and very diverse. New York, it's happened in New York, Georgia, California, San Francisco. It's all over. It's remarkable. And one thing, we have Jaylani. One thing I want to note in response to Salson's question is that, the people watching this incident and filming it really arguably did everything they legally could. They filmed it. They called for the officer to stop. They expressed cause. They tried to warn him. But the only thing else they could have done really was to physically intervene. And if they had tried to physically intervene, those officers would have, who knows, maced them, shot them, tased them. And even if they'd saved George Floyd by, bum rushing that officer, they'd all be sitting in jail right now, or maybe even more than George Floyd to be dead. So these people really did everything they could. And that's the sad thing, that if you're a police officer, you can sit there and murder someone in slow motion for 8 minutes, and there's nothing anyone else can do. They cannot physically stop you. And even the fellow officer who was standing there, the Asian American officer, did nothing to stop him, just sat there and let it happen, did not intervene. So let's go to Jaylani right now. I think Jaylani is actually, this is Jaylani Hussein, Executive Director of CARE Minnesota. He's at the scene of the murder and the protest. Assalamu alaikum, Jaylani, can you hear us?
Alaikum salam. Alaikum salam. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can. Take it away. What's happening out there? Just, give us the lay of the land. What's happening in Minnesota right now? What are you seeing?
Well, people have gathered again today. We closed off the corner where this occurred. Unfortunately, as you can see, people are still shocked. We're all shocked. None of us really expected another Eric Gardner similar situation. There really has been a lot of these cases here in Minnesota. We pride ourselves of being a very progressive state, but we are a state that is as guilty as any other state in killing innocent African Americans in this country. George Floyd was just another member of our community that has been taken down. The only thing that I think makes this case different is because there's actually witnesses. As you all saw the video, there were actually witnesses that were, that recorded it and that were pleading out to these police officers to not kill this innocent man. And they wouldn't listen to them. They didn't listen to the pleas of help and cry and from George as well. And so we're as mad as we can be right now. We can understand the whole nation is watching, but this is systematic. It's happening every day. It's just a different city with a different title, with a different name, another human being. It's the same police force that has been trained to kill, the type of same police force that continues to make excuses for themselves. There should be a massive number of people that resign from the police department today in protest and standing with us here on this side of the street to say that they're not going to stand and be in the police department with other racist cops. You know, we know that when this president showed up here, the union leader of the police department, Minneapolis, was right on the stage with him, Bob Kroll, and he already started to defend these 4 officers in his first press statement. And on top of that, you know, this police officer who actually killed George was there at the rally with President Trump. So we've got racist officers right now working who are committing these crimes. And unfortunately, the response has been always the same. We're shocked. We're all shocked right now. We're upset as we can be. But the reality is nothing changes. But that's not the reality. The reality is George's life is going to mean a lot for a lot of people because we're going to make a difference. And so for all of you who are watching, wherever you are at, don't think that this is happening in Minneapolis today. There's someone else in your neighborhood that this police department, your police department in your city, has committed these kind of crimes before. It's the same mentality. This has been happening in this country since slavery to mass incarceration to lynching, and to today what we see, this type of brutality. And you see how the other officers were standing there, literally okay with someone, you know, calling out, "I can't breathe, you know, I have pain in my body," and he's not resisting, and they still saw him as a threat. You know, we can't have that type of police in our community. And so it's a really unfortunate, sad day for all of us here in our community here in Minnesota and Minneapolis. You know, I'm proud of the people that came out yesterday. We had thousands upon thousands of people fill the streets yesterday in this challenging COVID time. People are masked up. People are social distancing, as you can see. But as you can hear from my voice, but we are frustrated. You know, Jamar Clark from Minneapolis did not get justice. Philando Castile did not get justice. Isaac Ayton did not get justice. And that list continues to grow every single day. That list continues to grow every single day. And now we add George to that list, but something is going to change. So today at CARE Minnesota, we are continuing our call for immediate arrest of all 4 officers while pending charges. They can hold them on other charges, and also no bail. So these officers should be in prison until all of this is sorted out. This is the only way we can feel that there is the process of justice is moving forward. Giving these officers this type of leeway and protection should end today, and should end with George. No officer who kills anybody should be at home. They should be in prison just like anybody else. A heinous crime against an innocent person should be frowned upon and condemned in all matters. And so elected leaders right now are on the clock. They claim that they are standing with us, the mayor and the police chief and all of the other leaders, but they're on the clock right now. And we need to say change. And that change starts with these 4 officers being in jumpsuits right now in prison where they belong. And while the investigation, which I know will take some time, gets unsorted, and no bail. So jail and no bail is what we're going to call for right now for these officers.
Gotcha, Jaylani. Jail and no bail. Last question to you before I let you go. This has happened in Minneapolis before. What do you think needs to happen to fix the long-term structural issues that apparently exist in that police department, to the point that, you know, you could have 4 officers letting this happen, not blinking an eye? And your city is diverse. You have a mayor who considers himself progressive. Minnesota's a, you know, relatively left-leaning state. So, you know, you would think the stereotype politically is that, you know, things would be better there, but that's apparently not the case. So what needs to happen long-term? The officers, dealing with them is one thing, but long-term, how do we stop this from happening in Minnesota and other places?
Well, I think the first thing we have to ask ourselves is that we have to recognize the history of discrimination in this country. We have to recognize that the police force has been made as an occupying force of people of color's neighborhoods. This has been the case. So I think a lot of us rethink that we have to do these Band-Aid solutions. We have to look at this issue holistically. We have to recognize that the police forces are only in neighborhoods where there's poverty. They're only in neighborhoods where there's real economic challenges and other challenges, housing crisis, and among other things. So we have to recognize that the structure of the police force today is built on really prosecuting the poor. And so when a rich person in this country gets prosecuted, they get lawyers, they get all the kind of stops, and usually nothing happens to them. So we got to really reform the entire concept of what it is to be a police officer in this world today. If the police are only circling Black neighborhoods, that is not police. That's an occupying force. And this was said in the 1940s. It was said in the 1970s. It was said over and over again. So the first thing I would recommend for everybody is to re-examine the concept of the policing in our society today. Where they do go, what do they do? I'll give you an example. It has been reported that 94% of the police officers in Minneapolis today do not live in Minneapolis. If you can't even live in the city, you cannot enforce any policing. If you're afraid to even live in Minneapolis, you should not be policing the city. In addition to that, police who work in these environments face discrimination themselves. There are a lot of Black officers, minority officers, who when they work in these facilities and work, have reported to us that they are being discriminated against. So there is a culture within the system right now that welcomes discrimination, that welcomes this types of racism within. And that means we need more support for whistleblower officers. Officers right now who feel the pain of what's happening in Minneapolis need to be provided the type of support that they need to be able to provide the type of clarity around what is happening internally. The second thing I think is going to be critical is that the police have to now account to the citizens. There should be a citizen board and a community board for all police departments. In addition to that, every police officer who serves should be treated worse than an average person killing. Because when you have a gun, you should have a higher authority of when you use it or not. Why is it that in places, other parts of the world, police officers are not using guns, but they're still able to deal with these issues much, much better? So police accountability, and I think training is a big thing, but I don't think training internally within the police department is gonna help. I think every police officer who is ever gonna be a police officer, meaning all new recruits, should go through a de-escalation tactic versus what we have now, which is use of force. Right now, police officers are just trained to do use of force. And de-escalation, according to many police officers, is actually a tactic where they think they will get killed by using de-escalation tactics. So right now, everything is flipped upside down. The structure of the police departments only focuses on policing minorities and people of color and in low-income areas. That is where the heavy is. And in fact, most of us in the public believe that that's where the police should be. But the reality is those same police officers are the ones today doing what they're doing. The second aspect is we need to define who should be policing and how those police officers either are integral part of the city, part of the population, part of the community, or they should not. You shouldn't be living 40 miles away and working in a city where you think everyone there, is somehow a criminal. And then finally, I would just say, this protection for whistleblowers. Police officers right now most of them fear for their lives, even to come forward and to account to the abuses and discrimination and the bad treatment that is happening internally. So I think right now we need reform on all parts, but many people immediately rush into these Band-Aid solutions that do not recognize the systematic systems that these police departments are built on over and over and over again. And then finally, voting. People always forget about voting. You gotta vote on policies that are being implemented. Every mayor in the city should have a police mandate, a police principle. How are they going to rule over their police department and what the expectations are? And those expectations should not be, we now have body cameras. I mean, it's like we're in the 21st century. That is not a major accomplishment that we have body cameras, right? But the police unions in this country, police administrations have been fighting back and pushing back. And you will see today, after these incidents, all of these little stories that are gonna be shared through social media of how a police officer gives a kid ice cream, and everybody's gonna love that. But we have to realize that's a politically branded marketing machine that is here there to make us forget about the injustice that these systems are built on. We don't want to declare every police officer to be racist. But if there is enough racist police officers, they condemn the entire police department. And I think it's unfair to those hardworking police officers. But if they're not feeling comfortable enough to come out, call out their colleagues, and help provide some internal process, which we haven't seen today yet, then we really need to think about reforming the entire police department and what they do, what they can do, and most importantly, who is the oversight. And if the citizens don't have oversight, then we really are being occupied by what I would consider to be economically driven systems.
Yeah. And again, Jaylani, what's so sad is everything you're describing is not unique to Minneapolis, not unique to Minnesota. We're seeing it. We've seen it all over the country. You all have your hands full there, a big mountain to climb, but we'll be making dua for you, inshallah. Please keep us posted on what's happening. We hope as a very first step, as you said, jail, no bail, inshallah, in addition to the long-term changes that are made. Salson, you have anything you want to ask Jaylani before we let him go?
So one of the things that I really struggle with in my circle and other people do as well is having constructive conversations with people who have blind spots about this particular issue. So do you have any suggestions for us on how to approach conversations with people who might not be receptive to this issue?
So I think the first thing is we should run away from absolutes, the absolute, everything this or everything that. But I think the reality here is that there are always going to be those who protect the police departments no matter what. There are also those who are afraid of the police departments who also might protect them. I think one of the things we have to be mindful about critical thought is that because we have been so conditioned to think about the police department in a certain way, that when they commit crimes as heinous as these, our implicit bias gets in the way, and we start to think, we can't think bad about the police. But if you look at the history of this police departments, what the police were doing, they started out as being those who chased down free slaves, those who are trying to free themselves from slavery, right? That's how the police departments were created. And then they became, privatized police, right? So there is a history of how police departments work. The other thing that I think is very dangerous is the partnership between the military and the police department, right? The military has certain trainings that have now been introduced in the police forces. They have now these armored equipments that they can roll out into the cities, right? So when you have now trainers who are coming to your police department, who are training them in ways of combat in a war, that is also extremely, extremely dangerous. And so what I would say is, we need to have these conversations. It shouldn't be absolute. It shouldn't be, get rid of everything or keep everything. But I think the nuances should be there. There are people who their family and loved ones work in the police department who are concerned for their loved ones right now. But I think they need to understand today that the flip side is we're also concerned. None of us know right now what could happen to us on any street in Minneapolis when the police department pulls you over for any reason, right? And so, that concern is what we feel right now. And so, I think this requires a sense of leadership. But I remind people, I think the biggest reminding is in order to see change, we need to recognize change takes time. And we have to be willing to ride that. We have seen these too many often. They continue to happen everywhere because there's a pattern that keeps creating it. And so we have to say that in the next 2 to 4 years, we're going to see massive change in how police operates. And that will be the first time we have historically changed, this country. So I think some people are not going to be happy, but the reality is that we know right now that the pain that we're feeling, that many people who don't live here, many people who especially our white allies feel that pain. But right now is the moment that we need to capitalize on this, and we need to see that we need to have reform because it's going to continue to happen. That chokehold, that type of force, the way that the other officers could not even see this person gasping for air and did not even help. I mean, that's 4 complacent officers who killed them. 4. It wasn't one in a dark area. It wasn't right. It wasn't an instantaneous killing. Right. This wasn't like 3 seconds. I didn't know. Right. This is 5-6 minutes of choking somebody lifeless by having 3 grown men literally be on top of him. So
Yeah. Slow
this
motion
is
murder.
yeah. So we need to recognize right now that this is one of the worst police killings in this country, and we hope the best comes out of this, as we say in Islam, "Asa an takrahu shay'an wa huwa khayrun lakum," that in times we don't know this pain, what it means, and why we're going through it, but God has a plan, and we hope that God has a plan that the death of this great man here, George Floyd, will bring on more life for more people who could have been killed by this police department, because we stood up when we made change.
God willing, inshallah, inshallah. Thank you, Brother Jailani. Jazakallah khairan. Stay safe out there. We see your mask up. Stay safe. May Allah protect you and your family, and guide all the protesters and everyone fighting for justice. Guide us all to be pleasing to Allah, and to fight for justice in this life, and to receive the reward of it in the next. Thank you, brother. We'll talk soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum. All right, and Brother Muhammad, thank you so much for joining us. We ran along with the program, but we thought important topic. Jailani, obviously being out there, having so much info to share. We thank you for joining us. And Salsan, thank you so much as well for joining us from Atlanta, and for the work you're doing on multiple cases of police violence out there. Inshallah, I look forward to the day when we don't have to keep discussing this topic on this program, but it seems like that day may not be coming anytime soon. So until then, we will keep on, inshallah. Salsan, any closing remarks for us to close this out?
Yes, I do want to say that everyone has a voice, and it's your responsibility to utilize that voice to ensure that we get the justice that George Floyd and all the individuals impacted by police brutality and racism deserve.
Inshallah, absolutely. All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Please keep track of the story. We'll keep you updated. So will Care Minnesota, inshallah. And please make dua. May Allah guide and comfort the family of George Floyd and everyone who's been unjustly killed around the world. May Allah protect us from such violence. All right, thank you, everyone. Eid Mubarak. We'll be in touch, inshallah. We'll be tracking these and other stories and doing what we can, inshallah. In the meantime, assalamu alaikum. May peace be upon you.
Assalamu alaikum.